Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of Season 11 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner Graham Barrow. Hello Graham.
Hello Ray.
Now Graham, something like 2,500 new companies are being incorporated in the UK every day. That's right, isn't it?
It is, Ray, and that's just adding to the 6 million or so that are already on the register.
And right now, firms will be onboarding new businesses and issuing them accounts based on very little available information. And sadly, many of those new business customers will not be who they purport to be.
You are spot on, Ray, and it's incredibly hard to necessarily know that from the paucity of information that's available to you on a brand new company.
And that's where our sponsor comes in, isn't it?
It is. Risk Alert 247 gives firms a reliable rating of the likely risks of any UK incorporated company, new or old, based on 160 or so red flags through its API.
And there's a graphical user interface too, which means you can dive into the detail and access a series of additional investigative tools.
Yeah, and if that sounds like something you want to know more about, please contact either of us and we will arrange a demo.
Now, Graham, we've recently been involved in designing and delivering a few training pieces on different aspects of anti-financial crime, so I thought we could usefully present an episode talking about AML training and the regulatory requirements.
I think that's a good plan, Ray, and I noticed, bless you, that you've been working weekends on this, haven't you?
Well, yes, the Dark Money Files has been working with Client Fabric to produce an anti-financial crime boot camp, and once a month I invite a different group of financial crime fighters to come and yomp over the anti-financial crime landscape with me on a Saturday and Sunday morning.
Well, that sounds just rather exhausting.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of fun actually, although admittedly that's geeky fun.
Well, yeah, but anyway, this positions us very well to talk about the training requirements. What are firms expected to do in this respect, Ray?
Well, Graham, this will vary a little from country to country because FATF, in its recommendations, is largely silent on the matter. At the EU directive level, there's not much either. Article 46 says, member states shall require that obliged entities take measures to include participation of their employees in special ongoing training programs to help them recognise operations which may be related to money laundering or terrorist financing, and to instruct them as to how to proceed in such cases.
Yes, and exactly how that lands in national legislations can vary a bit. But I think there's broad consensus, isn't there, on what firms generally have to do?
Yeah, I think so. It comes down to making sure that people working in regulated firms are aware of their responsibilities in relation to the detection and prevention of financial crime throughout their employment by the firm.
Okay, let's unpack that just a little, Ray. Are we talking about just AML, anti-money laundering, or second-line compliance staff here?
No, we're talking about pretty much all staff, or what you might think of as relevant staff.
And what does that mean, Ray?
Opinions differ, Graham. Some firms take the view that just customer-facing staff are in scope, but I think the requirement is a bit broader. I think it extends to anyone who could conceivably be cited on financial crime red flags of any kind.
So that would include people who, for example, never see a customer but work at the back office, I don't know, processing transactions, say.
Yeah, I think so. For my money, it means most people in the regulated firm, but firms might choose to make exceptions for specialised teams like HR, for instance, who aren't cited on customers or their activity at all.
Yeah. Not going to go down that rabbit hole. That said, many firms don't make any exclusions and the training is mandatory for all. And I guess that's the most risk-averse approach.
Yeah, very much so. When do firms schedule this training in your experience, Graham?
Well, staff joining the firm need to receive the training as soon as possible. For most firms, that means within a week or two, certainly within a month of starting.
Which is fine, I guess, if you've got automated e-learning or a regular schedule of induction sessions, say once a month. But in smaller firms that only take on new people irregularly, this can be tricky.
Oh, it can.
What has to be covered?
Well, I think you'd expect to see some content that explains what financial crime is and how the firm and its employees are exposed to it. Crucially, I think, staff have to be aware of their obligations to detect and escalate unusual or suspicious activity and to know what steps to take when they need to do that.
So the second part of that is going to be quite firm specific, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's why, as useful as it is to buy in some generic e-learning, you have to either supplement this with some additional local content that you deliver separately, or by having the main material customised to reflect your procedures.
And does that additional localised material have to be delivered face-to-face in classroom training, Graham?
Well, I would say not, Ray, but you would have to determine how effective the training you decided to do was.
So if you can determine that, say, circulating your procedure and getting people to acknowledge they've reviewed it was effective, then you can just do it that way.
Yes, I would say so. And in determining that that was effective, you might want to do some spot checks, look at the procedure in action, see how well it tends to be performed, and maybe interview some staff members to test their understanding.
And I think there's an obligation to check the understanding of all the training rather than just those procedures.
Yes, and typically this will mean a test, almost inevitably a multiple choice test, where there's a set pass mark you have to attain.
And listeners who've been with us for a while will be aware of how well we believe that tends to be done in our industry and how it could quite easily be improved.
Yeah, that is true. But I think you could make an argument for getting that assurance in other ways that just don't involve a test at all.
Yeah, very much so. Although in some jurisdictions the regulatory expectation is a formal test.
And of course, whatever assurance method you are using, you'll want to keep a permanent record of both the training each employee undertakes and the assurance event and the outcome.
Quite so.
Now, there's an expectation too, isn't there, that as well as training new staff, you will also undertake refresher training for existing staff on a regular basis.
Yeah, and in terms of exactly how regular this means, most firms opt for an annual cycle, unless there's a need for immediate training when there's a significant change in what you expect from people.
Yeah, in which case you'd either bring forward the annual event or run some interim standalone training to cover the new bit.
It's not really rocket science, all this, is it?
Well, you wouldn't think so, Ray, but how often do we see or hear about this going wrong?
Well, it's not infrequent, Graham.
So, what are some of the things that firms do get wrong, Ray?
Well, I think that first of all, it's very easy to approach AML training as a box-ticking exercise.
Isn't that the point though, Ray? Isn't this all about box ticking?
Well, I'd agree that this is a box you're expected to tick, and with good reason. But if all you do is tick the box, it's going to be of limited benefit.
And one of the things we see is that the training can be very high level and theoretical.
Yeah, and dated. I really don't understand why every AML course has to start with an explanation of placement, layering and integration, when that doesn't really describe a lot of modern criminality, and certainly isn't related to what someone might see in their own role in their own firm.
Yes, and there's the key to having effective training, making it relevant to the people attending. What can they do with this learning in their own jobs right now or soon? The training has to help them make that link.
It certainly does. And of course, in the 2020s, the landscape isn't the same as in past eras. You don't necessarily need a bank anymore to manage your finances. Apps, payment providers, all kinds of fintechs, and of course the cryptosphere are all part of the real-world landscape that often don't make it into the training.
But then this is necessarily introductory training. Can it go too deeply into all of those modern facets?
Well, no, of course not. But if every example in the training predates the current paradigm, that's a problem. If you're asked to consider the plight only of a bank teller being offered a briefcase full of cash, then you're not really describing the real world for most of your audience.
And that is a fair point, Ray. And as an aside, it's a long time since most criminals laundered with a bag of cash. If we think about authorised push payment fraud or ransomware or wash trading and rug pulls, for instance, the proceeds of crime are already inside the financial system. There is no big bag that says swag on it stuffed with banknotes, is there?
Well, there certainly isn't. Although that still happens, of course, and our listeners will know about one prominent example of this in the current century. But if that's all you're training people to worry about, you're handing the bad guys a free pass.
Right. So what else do firms sometimes get wrong with their training?
Well, we've already discussed the need to supplement anything generic with information and preferably some actual training on the firm-specific procedures and systems people need to engage with. But that's often conspicuous by its absence.
And for me, Ray, that's the really important bit.
I agree.
One thing I always look out for in a training plan is some recognition that people who perform different roles in an organisation are likely to need to have some level of tailoring in the training to reflect what they will actually need to know and, more importantly, be able to do on a day-to-day basis.
Spot on, Graham. And to extend that point, any plan needs to address the training needs of the second-line financial crime specialists in the organisation too. When the generic training leaves people in mainstream roles with questions or problems, they need to be able to call on expertise within the organisation that goes beyond the basics. And that's not going to come out of nowhere, is it?
No. I think often firms either rely on their specialist second-line staff to look after their own knowledge needs, or they hire to acquire people who already have the skills.
But of course those skills will degrade if people don't stay up to date with new developments, new regulation, new criminal trends, new thinking.
Yeah, so as a firm, you have to make sure you at least create the conditions that allow your specialists to learn. That means in larger organisations creating your own specialist training courses. But there's also a range of external providers you can call on, and they're often linked to certifications or qualifications.
And there's another group who are even more frequently overlooked in the FinCrime training plan.
And who is that, Ray?
The firm's leadership, Graham, the board and the most senior layer of managers. These folks are often left to fend for themselves, but when you think about the risks they're holding, that's mad.
Yes, and these are the people who are the end point for escalations, making the biggest decisions. You can't really afford these folks to be off their game.
And so for my money, Graham, there's a really important corner of the FinCrime training plan that addresses the ongoing needs of the board, and in particular new folks joining the leadership team internally or from outside.
Now, I think it's also worth talking about the different modalities of training, isn't it?
It is. In regulatory terms, you have a fairly free hand here. You can do face-to-face classroom training, or you can do the same thing on an online platform like Zoom. But both of those need someone to run the sessions every time, don't they?
They do, and firms might choose to put in place an on-demand learning system using either a pre-recorded session that people can watch in their own time or having interactive e-learning. So are there other options?
Well, I suppose the bargain basement option is to circulate written material that people have to read and maybe sign to acknowledge they understand it.
But is that really effective, Ray?
Well, I mean, I suppose it could be, but I'd say the onus would be on you as a firm to determine that it was effective for your staff.
Okay then, but that just gives you another problem and probably wipes out the time saving of not fielding a trainer or buying e-learning.
Well, it may well do. It may well. And whatever method you use, I think you'd want to give people a clear route to ask questions and get additional help and support if they needed it to access the material.
Okay, so lots of choices to make. Earlier, we both made reference to a training plan. Do you need to maintain one of those?
Well, it's not a specific requirement in all jurisdictions, Graham, but it is in some. So SEPLAC, for instance, requires Spanish regulated entities to create an annual AML training plan. I think I'd recommend firms to have one, whether it's a legal requirement or not, because it helps manage the other obligations.
It's always a reassuring document, isn't it, to be able to access?
So, I think that probably covers the main considerations around the training requirement, and I can't really believe we've not covered this ground earlier.
Well, no, and it just makes you wonder, what else have we failed to look at so far?
Well, I think I'd throw that over to our listeners. If there's something you think we've unaccountably ignored so far, please let us know. But in the meantime, Graham, what's next for us?
Well, Ray, you can't help but have noticed a few pretty large regulatory actions on both sides of the Atlantic, and oddly, some of the elements within those actions relate quite strongly to the last 10 or 15 minutes of our conversation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, really. So I thought it might be interesting to see what common themes those actions have and how they relate back to that whole training thing. And we can extract kind of the important elements between those well-examined headlines.
I'm looking forward to it.